Hello, and welcome to the first of our drum machine tutorials with computer music. In our first tutorial, we're going to take a look at the legendary track Planet Rock, which was originally by African Bambaataa and the Soulsonic Force. Harking back to the early 80s, this was one of the very first hip-hop tracks, and it placed the Roland TR-808 drum machine right at the heart of the genre. It's worth mentioning that you don't have to have this plugin to create this pattern. As long as you have a set of 808 sounds, which most DAWs do as part of their library, you should be able to recreate something very similar. Start by loading your favoured DAW and make sure you plug in your sounds so they're ready to go. As you can see, we're using the Roland 808. We're going to be programming the notes for this sequence within our DAW rather than using the sequence editor within the Roland plugin. With this in mind, go to the Option button on the 808 plugin and just check that you don't have the Position Lock to DAW checked. This basically means that your sequencer won't start within the plugin at the same time as running the DAW. In other words, we're just using the 808 plugin to trigger the sounds themselves from the DAW. The pattern that we're going to create here is actually a 2-bar loop or cycle. So just ensure that you have 2 bars to work with and make sure you can see your editor nice and clearly. We're working within Logic using the Piano Roll editor, but there are plenty of DAWs with their own matrix style editors, so use whatever works for you. At the moment, we've got all of the notes muted, so I'm going to start with the bass drum, which is playing on note C1. First thing to note is that we have a note trigger on the first beat of the first bar and the first beat of the second bar. We then also have notes on the second quaver or second eighth note of the second beat, also in both bars. What's interesting is we have a little turnaround at the end here, which just kind of adds a little skip and syncopation. So when we play this pattern like this, it sounds like this. Now thankfully, the snare drum is a little bit easier. The snare drum literally just plays on beats 2 and 4 in all bars. And in actual fact, the clap, which is on the E flat or the D sharp above it, plays at exactly the same time. So we're going to put both of those elements in, and it'll also give us a clearer indication of where the tempo is. Being quite a dancey groove, you could quite happily work at 120 BPM, but actually the original track is closer to 126, so you might want to nudge your sequencer's tempo up just a little bit to make it a little bit more exciting. Now let's look at the hi-hat pattern. The hi-hat only plays for a single bar and is then repeated, so there's no reason why you couldn't program in the first bar and then just simply copy it across to the second bar. We've already done this and it sounds like this. So notice that what we get is we get the second 16th in each 4 is a rest, but then in the last crotchet or quarter note of the entire bar, we have 4 strikes. And that goes through and is copied from the first bar to the second bar. So the final part of this pattern relates to the cowbell. The cowbell you'll find on note D sharp 2, which is a little bit further up the keyboard, and we've got a pattern that sounds like this. And in fact, that cowbell sound was a very important sound in early hip-hop. It was used quite a lot on these kinds of tracks. Now, we've been quite specific and tried to make that sound exactly like the original. You could, of course, program a slightly different pattern, and to be honest with you, as long as it shares similar traits, it won't sound a million miles away. So you could actually make the track a little bit more original for your own purposes. One final little detail, and bearing in mind that we're trying to be as exacting as possible here, we discovered that on the Roland plugin, we found that the cowbell was a little bit flat compared to the original. So we've just tuned that up by 2 semitones to give it a pitch which is exactly like the original. Sure enough, we now have an entire pattern that sounds like this.